What do you get when you combine one of the most hated publishers in the gaming industry with one of the most controversial franchises in entertainment? Well, Star Wars Outlaws, developed by Ubisoft's Massive Entertainment, is an open-world action-adventure shooter that features some RPG elements, but not much. When the first trailer released in 2023, I was really excited. Star Wars has never gotten a true open-world game, and as a huge Star Wars fan, I was immediately intrigued. That being said, my excitement for Outlaws has slowly but surely been dying off. Once the initial hype died down and more gameplay was released, I just wasn't liking what I was seeing. Plus, Disney has seemingly made it their mission to do their damnedest to make sure I don't care about Star Wars anymore. It's kinda dead these days, at least to me, and I'm not really interested in anything new that happens with the IP. Unless it's Andor. That show is a goddamn masterpiece. Like Andor, Outlaws is not worried about the Jedi, Sith, Skywalkers, or any of that good stuff. With Outlaws, we take a look at the criminal underworld of Star Wars, which I'm totally cool with. There is a lot of cool stuff about Star Wars that doesn't involve the Force or the Jedi, so I was immediately sold on the concept of being a scoundrel in an open-world Star Wars game, and exploring the more gritty side of the universe. The concept of Outlaws is probably the closest thing we'll ever get to the cancelled 1313 Star Wars game, which, by the way, it's absolutely criminal that we never got that game. I will never forgive LucasArts for canceling it. Screw you guys. Anyway, spoiler alert, what we've got here with Outlaws is nothing close to what 1313 would have been. Instead, what we have here is the most average open world game I've ever played. Outlaws is half-baked in almost every department, which just leaves you longing for what could have been. There are flashes and moments of greatness, but if I'm being honest, it just makes the rest of the game look even worse in comparison. My name is Easy, and today I'm going to give you my honest thoughts and review of Star Wars Outlaws, and find out how this game managed to waste so much potential. Outlaws takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which is basically at the height of the Galactic Civil War. The Empire is preoccupied with the shenanigans of Luke Skywalker and the Rebellion, leaving an opening for the criminal underworld to rise. In enters our protagonist, Kay Vess, and her companion Nix. The game opens with a very slow-paced prologue in Canto Bight, a gambling city that you may remember from The Last Jedi if you unfortunately had to sit through that movie. The game's pacing really starts to pick up towards the end of the prologue as Kay Vess embarks on a heist against Slero, who is the crime lord of a major crime syndicate. The heist goes wrong, leading Kay to flee off-world and crashing on a new planet, marking the end of the prologue and the start of your open-world adventure. From here on out, the story is pretty hit and miss, and is kind of directionless for a large chunk of the game, as a lot of the main story quests kind of just end up feeling like side quests, because Kay Vess doesn't really have a goal outside of making it big one day by landing a score so huge that she'll be able to disappear forever. The lack of a clear endgame goal makes the early missions feel fairly inconsequential, but the charm and detail of living in a Star Wars criminal underworld does make up for this. But once that shine wears off, the story really starts to become a big issue, and I was almost completely tuned out from it by the time I got halfway through the game. Once the story finally slogs its way to the middle, you are given an endgame goal, and the narrative gains more direction than it ever had, meaning the mainline quests start to carry a lot more weight, and in turn will make you as a player start to care about it just a little bit more. Despite this, it's still too little too late. The story is lackluster at best. It has uneven pacing and large sections of the game where the plot stalls to a halt for 3, 4, even 5 mainline quests at a time. During the slow sections, it makes quests feel like literal nothing burgers, and I personally had more fun playing the side quests than I did the main ones. A lot of main quests did feel like a drag to get through, which isn't a good thing. Kay Vess, our protagonist and playable character, is actually pretty charming. She has a ton of Han Solo vibes where she exudes confidence and thrives under pressure. Kay is at her best when she's very clearly in over her head and out of her element. Big props to the voice actor here because she does a great job at telling us all we need to know about this character. For example, she'll tell her friend Nix that they'll be okay and things will get better, but you can hear in her voice that she doesn't truly believe that, and there are plenty of moments like this throughout the game. Sadly, the rest of the cast is very forgettable. Not saying their voice actors didn't do good jobs, but just the characters themselves didn't get much exploration, meaning that outside of Kay Vess, you don't really get to know anybody. There are a few plot twists later in the game that add some depth to some of the side characters, but like the story itself, it's too little too late. I find myself not caring about a single character in this game. I kind of care about Kay, but her main story is so lackluster that I am kind of mixed. But I guess if we're not going to get a Han Solo game, Kay does a decent job at filling that void. Visually, the game is a mixed bag. The planets, cities, and environments look amazing. They are detailed and sometimes genuinely stunning. I found myself having to stop a few times and just enjoy the scenery. But while the planets and the backdrop and its details are beautiful, the characters look awful. I don't know what happened here. Kay Vess is a good example of this. She just looks off-putting. It's hard to describe. There's something wrong here. The faces look low quality and the lip syncing is completely off. In contrast, the pre-rendered cinematics look really good. Even characters like Kay Vess, who has caught a lot of flack for having a garbage character model, looks really good in the cinematics. But when you get in game, it's just, I don't know what happened. The character faces are just awful. Performance-wise, the game's pretty good. You can consistently get high frames throughout 90% of the game, depending on your hardware, and I have heard the console editions are good as well. I played on high, which is the second highest preset and the footage that you're watching here. I would have gone for Ultra, but I have a 3070 Ti, so I think my PC would have exploded if I went up to Ultra. Although, I do have a friend that has a 4080 Super, and I was watching him play, and his game ran similar to mine on Ultra settings, and his performance was great. However, there are sections of the game where you'll get frame drops regardless of your hardware, and it actually gets pretty bad at some points. I've heard reports that fighting in the open world while dynamic weather is happening and lots of enemies are spawned in can start to eat away at your frames, and there are certain areas on the map that just randomly frame drop for no reason. The developers say they are aware of these things and they have already rolled out patches to seemingly fix some of them. Back to the visuals and graphics, the finer details of the world are absolutely breathtaking. In my opinion, this is by far the highlight of the game. The attention to detail is remarkable. They perfectly capture the essence of Star Wars, maybe better than any other game I've played. Simply walking through a city feels like you are immersed in the Star Wars universe, with vendors selling junk and trinkets, stormtroopers harassing civilians, aliens arguing with each other, droids randomly skirting by, and a general sense of life in every corner of the planet in every city. And by the way, if you ask me, every city actually does feel different. They seem to have their own little vibe to them. For example, the first city is a classic Star Wars city that you'll see in almost every media, filled with neon lights, cantinas, gangsters, gamblers. But on that same planet, just about 2,000 kilometers away, you'll find a smaller settlement that is far different. Rather than being a gambling and crime town, this settlement gives off hard-working vibes, with smaller houses and scrappy settlers that'll help mod your ship or mod your speeder. It's really cool to see this difference. The open world areas outside the cities are also impressive. They are filled with a wide variety of flora and fauna, feature a dynamic weather system unique to each planet, and of course is filled with Star Wars Easter eggs and lore, ranging from deep cuts that only hardcore fans will know, to the stuff that even casual fans will recognize. Even the Imperial ships are spot on, with officers barking orders at stormtroopers, mouse droids flying by, and the cold gray hallways lit by the iconic white fluorescent lights. The aesthetic and the atmosphere is near perfect in this game, no matter where you are in the galaxy. Everywhere in this world feels real and alive. And the music brings all of this together into a faithful Star Wars adaptation. The music changes from planet to planet and is inspired by the films and TV shows. Some of it is inspired by the original trilogy as well, especially when you get to Tatooine. It sounds like it's straight out of Episode 4, and I love it so much. These make for moments that feel straight out of the movies as you zoom on your speeder through Tatooine, as the John Williams-inspired music swells while the twin suns set in the background, and Tusken Raiders stalk you from the ridges above. It's just so awesome. But we'll loop back around to planets when I start talking about quest design and exploration. For now, let's talk about the main components to this game, and why, despite the amazing atmosphere this game puts out, the game is overall just kind of a flop. Because alongside the story, the gameplay is where this game really struggles in my opinion. As a whole, the core gameplay and mechanics are just extremely average and bland. This game's like unseasoned chicken, or the saying that it's as wide as an ocean but as deep as a puddle. There is just literally no innovation anywhere when it comes to any single gameplay mechanic or system surrounding it. It's almost like the devs did the bare minimum and just left it as is. So while the gameplay is passable, it's not great by any means. It just feels like another modern Ubisoft game. The core game loop is basically just to get a quest, to do a thing, then you go do that thing, whether by stealth, parkour, or by shooting your way through. And this is kinda standard for most open world games, but the difference here is that there is literally not much else to it besides what I just described. You either stealth, parkour, or shoot your way through. And that typically wouldn't be a problem, but here, all three of those things are so basic and bland that they become repetitive very quickly, and you'll soon find yourself bored after just 10 to 15 hours playing this game. Take for example the gunplay, which is a majority of what you'll be doing in this game. Rather than explaining, it's easier to tell you to just look, because what you see is what you get. It's like the most basic third-person shooter you'd expect. If someone did a Unity third-person shooter tutorial, I'd expect it to look like this. You can duck behind cover, you can slide, you can shoot, you can melee, and you can throw grenades. That's about it. And these are all things you'd expect to be able to do in any shooter, but if you're waiting for some hidden mechanic or surprising wrench in the gunplay, you're not going to find it here. This is essentially how every enemy interaction goes. You just run in guns blazing and take down the enemies with ease. Again, it gets repetitive extremely quickly, and this is only sped up by the fact that the weapon you start with is the only weapon you're able to use. You can actually pick up some of the enemy weapons like the standard issue stormtrooper blasters or sniper rifles, but they're intended to be temporary pickups, not permanent solutions that you can sling on your back. Your character will drop this weapon if you perform pretty much any action besides shooting, and that's really disappointing, as the most fun gunplay comes from these weapons you find on the floor. It's really fun shooting a stormtrooper blaster, but you only get a few seconds of shooting before you're forced to drop it, whether because you run out of ammo or you have to go perform an action like climbing or doing an objective. I also have to add that you can mod your blaster, which I will talk about later, but none of these mods really change things so significantly that it enhances your gameplay or makes things less repetitive. Also, the melee combat is hilariously bad from an animation and realism standpoint, and I know discussing realism in a Star Wars game isn't the best direction to go, but I find it just kinda goofy that your character can just run up to any armored enemy and punch them in the face 3 times and they drop dead. The takedowns look even worse than the stupid looking melee combat where you just go behind a stormtrooper, bonk them on the head, and they instantly knock out. It just feels like the least creative way to go about this, and takedowns like this belong in a mobile game, not a AAA Ubisoft game. I also think controlling Kay Vess as a whole is pretty clunky. She feels slow, her slide doesn't feel all too useful, her parkouring is slow, and her climbing is just non-existent. If there's like a rock in front of you that you feel like you should be able to climb, don't try it, you're not getting up that mountain. Outside of gunplay, there is stealth and parkour, which are the 2 other main things you'll be doing in this game. The stealth is probably the worst aspect of this game. I absolutely despise it. It is hard to describe, but the best word I'd say is primitive. It just feels like stealth that belongs in a 2000s Xbox indie game, and not a AAA 2024 game. It is just so painfully bare bones and half-baked that I try to avoid it at all costs. Unfortunately, there are sections of this game that are forced stealth, meaning that if you don't go stealth, you will instantly lose the mission and be forced to restart. It's not that it's totally terrible, it's just so basic and boring, because the enemy AI is so horrendously stupid that there is little to no challenge when it comes to stealth. Then there's the parkour, which is actually not too bad. Just like everything else, it's just very basic and safe. I can best compare it to Uncharted, but if it was like Uncharted Light Edition, right? You can climb on certain climbable surfaces and are able to use a grappling hook to swing across others, but there's just little challenge when it comes to this, and it feels really clunky. You have almost no control over your character because these sequences are basically just following the obvious path that has been clearly laid out for you by marked yellow surfaces. Outside of the 3 main mechanics of shooting, parkour, and stealth, there's also spaceflight and dogfights, which is, again, extremely bare bones. It feels like the spacefight you'd expect in a game that isn't built around spaceflight, if that makes sense. Kind of like a Call of Duty campaign level, where it's the only sequence in the entire game where you actually fly something, except here, they've built part of this game around this spaceflight. And again, it's just basic. There are little controls, you just fly in a straight line, and to take down enemies, you go behind them and start shooting. There's nothing more to it. Same goes for speeder travel. It isn't much different than your basic motorcycle in any other open world game. You can go straight, backwards, turn, or brake, and that's about it. And honestly, the more you explore the planets, you don't even need your bike because you unlock fast travel destinations, and that is much faster than hopping on your bike and driving for 5 minutes. It's also really annoying that you fly off your bike when you hit the smallest rock on the floor, and this happens all too much, even when driving through bushes. It is incredibly annoying. So overall, the gameplay is just really basic. It's by the books and it's safe. There isn't anything innovative here, and it all gets stale really fast. That being said, I did have fun with it at certain points. There were flashes when all of the mechanics gelled together to create a really fun experience. For example, there was a mission really early on in the game where you sneak into an Imperial space station. Rather than being forced stealth, your objective is to not set off an alarm. So there are some rooms and areas in this level where you definitely need stealth to get by, but there are also areas where you can go out guns blazing as long as the enemy doesn't hit the alarm. And you do those things while working your way up the ship by parkouring and swinging around. This was my favorite quest in the game by far, as it combined gunplay, stealth, and parkour very seamlessly. In fact, it was the only quest that I can remember that combined all of these things. The game was at its best here. Even though all the mechanics are very basic, they somehow work when they're all used together. Unfortunately, that pretty much doesn't happen in this game. But there is one more aspect to the game rather than just completing quests, stealing stuff, and killing enemies. Exploration of the open world. There are 5 total planets you can visit in this game. However, the 5th is Kay's homeworld, which you do not return to until the end of the game, so effectively I view it as there being 4 true open world planets. The caveat here is that there is one planet out of the 4 that is only one city, meaning it doesn't really have the open world exploration that you're looking for, and you're kind of confined to a town, even though that town does have some exploration elements. Anyway, the 3 planets that do feature full open world with multiple different cities, settlements, and a bunch of land in between are fantastic. This goes hand in hand with the details I talked about earlier. The planets are beautiful, and there are things to do on them. Granted, a lot of it is just set dressing, but there is meaningful exploration that can help you progress through the game and get you more credits or better gear. Sadly, they do have some kind of BS hard limits on where you can go in this open world. Obviously, it can't just be unlimited like Minecraft, but they need to find better ways to limit where you can go, not just by putting a massive mountain in the way and kicking you out if you climb on top of it, which did happen to me. The game basically told me no and respawned me back down the mountain. But honestly, I feel like they placed too much faith in their wanted system to make the open world interesting, which wasn't very good if you ask me. The wanted system is basically just like GTA's star system, where as you commit crimes, you'll build up a wanted level, and in return, the Empire will send stormtroopers after you, getting increasingly harder as you gain more wanted level. Unfortunately, this wanted system is kind of the only challenge in the open world, and the problem with it is that you can kind of just ignore it, because again, the AI is so stupid and dumbed down that you can just walk by them. The first time I got a wanted level, I didn't even realize. It told me I was wanted, but nothing changed. Enemies spawned nearby, but were so lost and dumb that they couldn't even find me, even though I was just standing there in the open. So I drove away and my wanted level died out. I will say, once you reach the higher levels of wanted and the enemies can actually find you, it can present somewhat of a challenge. But realistically, the combat in this game isn't hard enough to pose a serious threat, and you can kind of just drive away and be okay. Overall, while the open world is beautiful and does feature things to do, I wish there was more. There is a decent amount of exploration, but a lot of it is just set dressing. Even in the cities, there are so many NPCs and cool things going on that you can't get involved with. You can't have a drink at the cantina, and you can't interact or bump into the NPCs. But you can gamble, which is actually a lot of fun. There are only 2 games you can play. One is a card game called Sabacc, and the other is just horse racing. Sabacc, though, is a banger. I've never played it before, but it is a mainstay in the Star Wars universe. It's the card game that pretty much every character in the galaxy plays, and it is so much fun. It is addicting. There's even a really cool quest line where your quest is to basically just beat all the high rollers on every planet, and you go through every planet just smoking the high rollers. It's so much fun. And speaking of quests, let's talk about that. The quest design in this game is really hit or miss, but no matter the quest, it's probably going to be something like steal this thing, or talk to this person, or hack this terminal, standard run-of-the-mill open world quests. But the quests are at their best when they involve the reputation system. Luckily, most side quests are linked with the reputation system. For context, there are 4 main crime syndicates in this game: the Pikes, the Crimson Dawn, the Hutts, and the Ishiga clan. These clans are powerful. They will make deals with the Empire, control lots of the playable territory, have stakes in vendors, and will offer you work. As a player, you can improve or worsen your reputation with each of these crime factions. Of course, with better reputation comes better bonuses. Those factions will allow you to get into their territory, will sell you items at cheaper prices, and will even supply you with powerful gear if you're able to hit the max reputation rank. But making one faction happy is sure to piss another one off. As your reputation worsens with certain factions, they will not allow you into their territory, will start offering you worse deals, and if you manage to get the worst possible reputation level, they may even start sending groups of thugs to take you out. This reputation system really shines when it gets involved with both main quests and side quests. Where the story is lacking, the reputation system can make up for it in some areas, making you feel like you are making meaningful progression even though the story isn't really moving forward. The system also makes for some of the best moments in the game, where you'll be given a choice to backstab your employer, which will make one faction really happy and the other really angry. These choices are some of my favorite moments in the game because some of them are actually difficult, especially when there's a really big payday being dangled in front of your face, but you also want to stay loyal to a certain faction since you've put so much time in for working for them. It's a system that unfortunately goes wasted on a game like this that has pretty bad gameplay and mechanics. It makes you wish those things are better, because if they were, this game would be an absolute banger. There's also a fair amount of progression in this game, but it's all very simple and doesn't go in depth. So if you're looking for Elden Ring min-maxing or Cyberpunk 2077 skill trees, you're not going to get it here, which I think is actually a major miss in a Star Wars game. Having limited progression and player choice is just wrong when you're in a galaxy that essentially anything is possible. You can upgrade things like blaster, speeder, ship, clothing, and your character's abilities. The blaster upgrades are actually pretty cool. Some of them turning your weapon into an explosive blaster with slow fire rate, or another taking it from pistol to rapid fire. I wouldn't say the blaster progression makes up for the lack of weapon choice, but it is something. The speeder and ship also have a lot of progression, but they're both just kinda meaningless. A lot of it is just better boosters or faster firing weapons, and nothing here really changes how you use these vehicles. Of course, we've also got clothing, which again is really basic. You've only got 3 options for clothing, being a jacket, your belt, and your pants. Each piece of clothing comes with a unique passive that will buff your character in a small way. For example, there's a belt that lets you hold more grenades, and a jacket that gives you more adrenaline. But I think there's just something lacking here, especially when you consider that we're literally in Star Wars. Why is an open world game limited to just 3 pieces of clothing, all of which are just very basic? I feel like this would have been the perfect game to be able to steal some Mandalorian armor and put that on, or find some old Clone Wars armor and be able to wear that. Of course, you can't. The customization is just so basic, and that's honestly unforgivable considering this is a Star Wars game. If I want to steal a Mandalorian helmet or disguise as a stormtrooper, I should be able to do that. Pretty huge missed opportunity here. Last thing I do want to mention is that there are a fair amount of bugs and glitches in this game. As mentioned earlier, the devs are already sending out patches, and these things may or may not be fixed, but I think every session I've played, there has been a noticeable bug or glitch that has either forced me to restart the mission or restart my entire game, which just, that's not good. Some of the memorable ones I found was a spawn glitch in this stealth mission where there was just like 8 enemies standing in the same spot and they wouldn't leave that location, which forced me to restart, and when I did, of course, there was only supposed to be 1 enemy posted at that location. Another bug I found was when I was first introduced to hyperspace travel, it literally wouldn't work. It said my jump was obstructed, but there was literally nothing but open space in front of me. I was also stuck on this screen because it was part of a tutorial thing and it wouldn't let me go anywhere else until I used hyperspace travel. So I restarted my game, and of course it did work when I came back. Another one that infuriated me most was one where Nyx was completely broke and just wouldn't move. The guy was just stuck, so I killed myself and respawned, and he was still broken. Nothing fixed him until I completely restarted the game. Softlock glitches like this one are incredibly frustrating and make me not want to relaunch after they happen. And those are just the 3 most memorable ones from my playtime. There are a plethora of smaller glitches and bugs throughout, so just be prepared to find some classic Ubisoft glitches that will probably, at some point, force a game restart. My final verdict for this game is that while it is fun for the most part, it gets repetitive quickly and will probably just be remembered for what could have been. At its core, I think they had a good direction and good concept, but just didn't execute or innovate for whatever reason. The game peaks with its reputation system and fantastic Star Wars vibe, design, and details. But the backdrop and setting for this game isn't enough to save it, and neither is the great reputation system that binds it all together. It's really sad because if the core gameplay was just slightly better or more interesting, or if the devs were willing to take some risks, we could have gotten something pretty great. But unfortunately, we ended up with the most basic open world game I've ever played. If I had to put it on a number scale, it'd be a flat 5 out of 10. Right in the middle. It's not bad, but it's also not good. Sure, I admit I did have fun at certain points, and the Star Wars aesthetic was enough to make me want to come back and continue playing and exploring. But what does it say about the gameplay and narrative if it's strictly the setting that is bringing me back? If you're a major Star Wars fan, I would consider getting this game only on a sale. This is not a $70 experience, not even close. For context, I bought a Ubisoft Plus subscription and immediately canceled it for 17 bones. So effectively, I've rented this game for 1 month for 17 bucks. And was it worth a $17 rental? Hell yeah it was. For that price, this game has enough to entertain you for a good 15 to 20 hours, and that's worth $17. especially if you're somebody who loves Star Wars like I do. So if you don't want to wait for a sale and you don't care about owning your game, I can recommend going that route. But if you're not interested at all in the Star Wars universe, I would just recommend staying completely away. If you're looking for in-depth progression, open world game mechanics, and great gameplay, you're not going to find it here. Ultimately, this game is a story of wasted potential. They pulled off the Star Wars setting better than I've ever seen, and the reputation system is really interesting. But those two things are not enough to save this game from the pitfalls of average at best gameplay, a lackluster narrative, and character models that have more polygons than Lara Croft. They definitely had the skeleton of a great game, but never put any meat on the bones. If you played Star Wars Outlaws, let me know what you thought of it down below. I'd love to discuss. And I've always got to tell you the classic YouTuber thing, go drop a like and subscribe, hit the bell, you know the drill. Anyway, that's all from me. Take care of yourselves. See ya!